VMware by Broadcom delivers VMware Cloud Foundation, a single platform with built-in certified Kubernetes runtime called the vSphere Kubernetes service. This simplifies Kubernetes deployment and management, enabling enterprises to run modern applications alongside traditional workloads. With automated deployment and lifecycle management, built-in security and resiliency, and enterprise-grade scalability, VCF offers a comprehensive private cloud infrastructure. VKS delivers high performance, cost optimization, and a familiar management experience, making Kubernetes more accessible for IT teams.
Hi, it's B. Cameron Gain of RevCom here with the new stack at KubeCon CloudNativeCon Europe in Amsterdam. And I'm here with Jad and Miles of VMware by Broadcom. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us. Yep.
And we were talking before the podcast started about the state of cloud native now. It's been undergoing a lot of changes, and some of the things that the DevOps and the platform engineering communities are asking for have changed a bit in that certain things like data sovereignty becoming more important. The private cloud is a huge shift towards private cloud, and a number of other things that have changed in cloud native. And I'm wondering if you could just describe those changes, and then for our viewers as well, what has changed, or how has Broadcom changed vis-a-vis VMware to meet this new age of cloud native? We can say that.
Yeah. So, I mean, we could probably fill up a day,
High level,
a day on this content. But I mean, in short, look, we've been around the block. We've been around this industry for quite some time. We've seen the shift from this pure infrastructure play, the massive private data centers, the enterprises wanting to maintain and control all of that, to this shift to the hyperscalers, and then eventually the cloud native services, and tying their apps to that. And we're somewhere in between those two over the last decade or so. But more recently, we've seen not only enterprises shift to the
private cloud.
Yeah, not so back to the private cloud, but also the willingness to incorporate open source, and CNCF. Now, that in itself isn't brand new, but the willingness for enterprise to make that as part of the native stack in enterprise services, and then bringing that as a second part of that to the private cloud, I personally have been seeing more and more and more of that. And back in my enterprise days, OpenStack was where you practiced, right?
Yep.
Today, it is core enterprise infrastructure stack and services stack. So there's a lot of things that are happening there. I kind of mashed a bunch of it together.
It's not new, but the momentum is building somewhat.
And the momentum is obvious, because you are now at a point where you've got these services, you've got that infrastructure, you're part of the community, but also a big part of the consumption. And now you have AI, and you have new concerns over data sovereignty, new concerns over infrastructure, and who owns that infrastructure, who has access to that infrastructure. And what we're seeing is that stack that has now become cloud native, and the enterprise fully adopted it, is now coming back on-prem. So we've kind of almost come full circle, but we're bringing the community in with us more than I've seen it in the past.
Before.
And so I think that kind of sums it up from my perspective, and Miles might have a different perspective.
I'd just like to riff on some of those points. So basically, like Jad was saying, there's sort of a stack that people are using of tooling. And traditionally, people were using tooling that was, first-party vendor, proprietary software, because that's where the quality was. That's where the features that they wanted were. And it's, open source is of such high quality nowadays that you don't necessarily need something completely proprietary to do that. And that's why we're trying to, bring on more and more open source projects, because if we go and talk to customers, our customers are talking to us about, what is your story for OpenTelemetry? Or, so these protocols, these projects are the standard now. It doesn't matter that you built something proprietary and internal. People want optionality. They don't want vendor lock-in. And all of that comes back to, the quality of open source is so high that it really doesn't make a ton of sense to go and reinvent the wheel. Maybe the best thing that you can offer is support, packaging, that kind of stuff.
And you're reassuring the community somewhat as well. For example, the donation of Valero, that's showing that you're moving away from a proprietary closed model. You're saying, hey, look, we're giving this to the CNCF. It's a donation. And that will, I would assume that's going to increase a lot of the collaboration and input, because it's no longer just a VMware-centric project. That is a community led effort in need of DR, which is critical.
And it's not just Valero. Like we have donated Contour as well, and there's Harbor, and there's a whole bunch of first-party open source that we've helped bring to bear on that too.
Yeah, and arguably, I think Miles touched on the trust of the open source community, but that's happened largely because of the open source community's alignment with the enterprise. I mean, when we were first using open source, it was in labs. It was in. But
it was like a beta,
toy project.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Even Kubernetes was like that, where customers didn't take Kubernetes to production until several years after the wide adoption.
It took them that long to figure it out.
It is hard.
And they're still figuring it out.
It is hard.
But so the thing is, when you have a company like VMware that has contributed and built into these various projects, then donate those to the community, that is one example of how you take a company again like VMware that's so enterprise aligned, taking that DNA and putting it out in the community. This is what we're seeing, across the board from several of the, your traditional enterprise type services pushing out these projects into the communities.
How does that manifest itself when you do that? I didn't quite get that. Is that the form of more commits, pull requests, or for the projects, or how is that?
In some cases, yeah. Some cases we'll contribute fixes to upstream and that kind of thing. We contribute to a number of the SIGs in the Kubernetes community to try and help drive those projects. It's especially with a project as large as Kubernetes, you really have to be involved as an enterprise. To number one, if you have opinions on the way things should go, you need to be engaged with the community to do that, and you need to come up with the best solution across all the vendors, because they're at the end of the day, a lot of the engineers are vendor sponsored, and everyone's interests, including the communities, need to be represented on those SIGs, those working groups.
And Kubernetes is a great example.
Yeah, I was getting ready.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know this, and a lot of people even wondering what VMware is doing at KubeCon. But the reality is, among the top 5 contributors historically of Kubernetes, like actually building, and contributing to Kubernetes project, is VMware. It's in our DNA. We've been doing it for 8+ years, and we're a large part of that.
Well, a lot of people aren't familiar with the story of how indirectly VMware a few years ago acquired the co-creators of Kubernetes.
Heptio.
Yeah. So how, maybe describe that, how that shows VMware's historical roots in Kubernetes, and as since then, or maybe before then, you've always been a leading contributor to Kubernetes, as you said.
Yeah, so that happened in 2018, the Heptio acquisition.
Yeah.
And that was a very important pivot point, I think, for VMware. But the strategy behind it actually started before that. We had internal projects where we were running containers on vSphere and our hypervisor, because it kind of made sense to do that. You've got this gold standard of a virtualization platform that the vast majority of the enterprises in the world were running, and you're like, well, let's just extend that to containers. And so that strategy started way back then. And then the acquisition of Heptio, our involvement with Pivotal and Cloud Foundry, and all these different pieces kind of coming together, and started bringing different communities together, but impacting the platforms as we went along. Miles, if you have something to add there.
Yeah, I mean, like Jad said, we've got all of these various technologies inside of the VMware portfolio now. And, sometimes, like we were talking before the show, some people are wondering, when should I use some of the Tanzu solutions versus some of the VCF solutions, or how do they complement each other,
There's been not confusion, but just not being up to speed on exactly how this all fits together. And before we get into that, though, the VM aspect. I mean, some analysts have said that the VMware is a bit late-ish for Kubernetes, but now there's more of an emphasis of VMs. And I was wondering if you could just talk about how that all comes together now.
So the late-ish conversation,
and what's going to happen
jump in
later.
when you want to.
Yeah.
So the late-ish conversation, I think we kind of touched on that with what we just mentioned about being in this community for almost a decade.
Yeah.
Deeply in the community and a big contributor, and Heptio and Joe Beta and all the folks that played as part of this strategy. I think what's new is the pivot, is the wholehearted adoption of not just Kubernetes, but the CNCF community. Now, VMware historically has been the gold standard in the enterprise, and it's been in every enterprise for many, many years in its beginnings and through its maturity. And the emphasis has been on how do we build this platform that delivers all the things that the enterprise wants. We've always been that company. When we tie into something, it was, how do you tie that in and meet enterprise needs? So security, scalability, and all these different requirements. Kubernetes has just been one of those things that run on VMware, but it's not what we yelled from the hilltop.
Yeah.
And I think that's the difference. And today, we are much less opinionated. We are much more open. And we are, in fact, enablers for half the companies you see or the projects you see in here, because we'll take our partners and our solutions and the things we co-engineer, and we say, we are going to align this with the enterprise needs that we have largely been the standard for from a private cloud and IaaS perspective. So that's our strategy now. So everybody hears us saying like Kubernetes. It's not new. It's just, it is absolutely the focus and the future as far as consumption.
I would like to add just that, the Kubernetes stuff is not just a bolt-on. Like, it could be perceived that it's just another workload. We just threw Kubernetes in there, and that's what you get with the platform. We fundamentally changed how you provision and use the APIs to create those workloads. So we have this modern API, like unified API surface now that we use internally in our product that is kubectl and kubeAPI driven.
Okay.
So we're provisioning Kubernetes clusters using Kubernetes CRDs. That is our control plane now as well. So all of our new integration services projects, they are all operated through kubeAPI as well. So it's not just like we have Kubernetes as an add-on. Yeah. Kubernetes is fundamental to how we are building our platform too.
That's where a lot of the knowledge comes from, obviously, and the
dog fooding is the best way.
Yeah. I agree. And philosophically, how do you describe now the relationship between containers and VMs?
Yeah, I mean, so you hear a lot about the one platform, right? So, I mean, traditionally, you're going to have your PaaS or app stack, and you're going to have your infra stack, right? And different players play different roles in those, and a lot of intersections and so on. But more and more often, we're seeing, from a runtime perspective, Kubernetes is infrastructure. Containers run on infrastructure. VMs run on infrastructure, and infrastructure is kind of the foundation for all of it. So we see this relationship brewing, but also coming to fruition where customers are saying, like, look, why do we have to pivot between these two very disparate platforms to run apps, what we call modern apps, a term I absolutely hate, and our traditional VMs, another term I absolutely hate. It's all apps, right? And why are we pivoting across two platforms? We're at a position now where we need a platform. So when I go to AWS or Google or Azure or any of those, I'm not creating lines in the sand on how I consume those clouds. I've got my EC2 and I've got my EKS, right? The private cloud should be exactly like that. And whether it is a whole set of VMs or a whole set of containers or Kubernetes clusters or whatever it is. It should be done in one pipeline, one workflow, one set of flow, because your applications actually span all of that. And so the differentiation should probably start kind of being secondary to like what it is I'm actually trying to accomplish. I'm building apps. Sometimes that'll be native, sometimes that'll be a VM, sometimes that'll be a container.
And also, it's not replacing. I think a lot of people see this containers versus VMs, et cetera, that they're missing the point. And I think,
I mean, there's use cases for both, right? The container play
together.
is for sure. And we even have a container runtime that uses VMs as a backbone, so they're not sharing a kernel with another container for security reasons. So like you can do both. You know, what matters, at least from my perspective, is from a platform engineering hat on, is what is my contract with the platform? Can I use a standard Kubernetes pod spec? How it's instantiated doesn't really matter, other than, is it an instance inside of a Linux VM, let's say, so your standard Kubernetes pod, or is it one of our hardened vSphere pods that runs with a segregated kernel?
Yeah.
So it shouldn't matter to me as the consumer of that service how that happens, but what is delivered to me is a different set of security capabilities or performance capabilities or whatever.
How do you describe that, though, and without going too much into the product side, but right now with VMware existing, what is the description of it? Or can you give me the nomenclature a little bit? I mean, you have PCF, and then as you go down from there, can you describe that on a CTO level?
Yeah, so VCF is basically the stack. It's the platform, and this is where you find a lot of our core bread and butter, vSphere, vCenter, and these are the products that over the years, products and services that have made up the vast majority of VMware's portfolio. That has now come to just be called VCF, also the name of our business, right? So VMware Cloud Foundation is essentially that, not a suite of products, not a bundle.
Right.
And so I've been here for 16 years, Miles a little bit less than that. We've been here for many iterations and many the whole evolution here. I haven't seen the platform come together as quickly and as solidly as it has in the last year and a half to 2 years. And it's something that I wish we did 10 years earlier.
Well, how does that happen? I mean, can you give me some specifics about how that's different?
Yeah, so we have a couple of different aspects, and so the first one is obviously bringing the whole cloud management and the whole hypervisor and hypervisor management stacks together. Our network virtualization, our storage virtualization, all just becoming core platform. Then on top of that is where some of this magic happens, right? We have the vSphere Kubernetes service.
Okay.
It is an upstream conformant Kubernetes runtime, right? And it's also where we are shifting a lot of the management from a platform perspective on top of. It's something called the supervisor, but that's just what we call it. But it's really just a Kubernetes control plane and that declarative API and so on. VKS.
It's a shift of engineers towards that Kubernetes control plane.
For our product, that's what I was alluding to earlier.
Exactly.
Our product is being built around those APIs as well.
Yeah, so whether you're provisioning storage or networking or compute or a container, a lot. That Kubernetes style API, that declarative API, is going to be your one-stop shop.
Right.
Now, just to put an analogy there, right? Again, Amazon, you've got EC2, you've got EKS, Azure. You've got the VM service and AKS. VMware, you've got your VM service, which now runs on top of on top of a Kubernetes API. And then you've got your VKS, which is your Kubernetes, and then container and everything else on top of that. So it just comes together. It's the public cloud operating model and the Kubernetes consumption model kind of coming together.
Miles?
I think you nailed it. I don't know that I need to add a whole ton more there.
In the hyperscalers, that relationship is changing a bit.
Yes.
Which one in particular?
Well, just in general. I mean, Amazon, Google Cloud, Azure. Is that
if we're referring to like the VMware's availability in the hyperscalers?
For example, I mean, is
Yeah.
there anything? Are there any changes taking place there?
I
that you
mean,
can talk about?
we still have our public cloud offerings on
Yeah.
top of those, like GCV and VMware Cloud on AWS as well. So like those stacks are still available. But as we were talking about before the show, you know, there is a big push towards sovereignty nowadays.
Yeah.
And generally that means running things in your own data centers. Customers want to own the data. They want to own where all the processing is done. So we've seen a big shift in demand back towards,
Yeah.
you know, let's say a traditional model that we're used to of they want all of those services on-prem, and they're not interested in the sort of fracturing things across public cloud and private cloud. And it seems to be more of a cohesive, we want to go to one vendor, we want to have control over our data, particularly in Europe is a thing now, yeah.
Oh yeah, really. I would have thought with the geopolitical changes, maybe that was pushing it too as well.
I think everyone is becoming a bit more, you know,
Sovereign conscious.
pretty much, yeah.
And that extends to SaaS also. Like Broadcom made an early, post acquisition of VMware, made an early decision that, you know, SaaS is not our business model, because we're seeing what we're responding to what customers are asking for. Like, listen, we want the private cloud, but we want to operate it like a public cloud. We want all the same constructs, but we also need this Kubernetes dial tone. If we were to continue to do this whole like split brain SaaS and on-prem, it wasn't giving us the focus that we needed as an engineering organization to deliver the goods. And you know, our leadership made that decision early on. And I say this because it's come up a lot. Like, how come you pulled back all your SaaS services? And I said, but that's the strategy, and that's what our customers are asking for. And we're responding to that. It helps us focus. It helps us be the dominant player in this private cloud. There's only a handful. And so, I mean, that's what my point is, that SaaS extends the same concept here of coming back on-prem.
I think that's why Jad mentioned, you know, we are seeing such a focus, and the way the products come together over the last 1.5 to 2 years has been so cohesive, and just feels like, you know, we're all driving towards the same goal. But like you said, you know, we're not fighting with that split brain anymore of we're trying to engineer everything for everyone. We're more focused, and that leads to a better end result.
So you're getting best of both worlds. That's what you're trying to achieve: containers and VMs and interchangeability of that, instead of just one or the other.
Yeah, and it doesn't need to be exclusive. You know, like you drive all this via the Kubernetes API. You know, we're not shy about saying that we think the way that you should run these sort of modern workloads is through a GitOps practice. You should be driving it through CRDs. That's why we've written all of our API surface is through the Kube API to allow you to do that, right? So yes, we realize the UI clicky thing is important for a lot of customers, but once you get to a level of maturity, you probably want to automate that, and GitOps, you know, we see is the way to do that. And the best way to provide for that is to provide that Kubernetes API surface, so you can use standard tools like Argo CD or Flux or whatever.
Well, thank you. It's B. Cameron Gain signing off this podcast for the New Stack at KubeCon plus CloudNativeCon Europe in Amsterdam. And thank you very much, Jad and Miles, for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.